Dorsey Jackson Global.
It has begun. It's perfect. Those were the words that came out of my mouth after I had been shown the tour of my new apartment. I was 22 at the time, and I was going to college in the city. Like most big cities, finding a good apartment seemed impossible, as I had been searching for months, and it wasn't until the last week of the 4th month that I found something I really liked. To be honest, I was shocked no one had snatched it up already. It had a spacious living room, a usable kitchen, enough bathrooms, and a perfect bedroom. I loved everything about it. Well, almost everything. The air in the apartment was a bit thick, and this was because of the numerous perfumed air fresheners that were situated all over the apartment. I didn't know why the place needed that many air fresheners, but it was the only mandatory thing that my landlord, Mr. Terrence, asked for. My opinions on my landlord, Mr. Terrence, were pretty normal. He was an awkward but quiet guy, which was a bit weird to me as he had a really huge build, so his character didn't match his appearance. As he stood in the apartment with me, Mr. Terrence looked at me and said, "So that's it, Nathan. Remember to leave the air fresheners on every day, in addition to spray a new can in the living room every morning before you leave." He then handed me a box filled with new air fresheners. The obsession with the perfumed air fresheners was a bit weird to me, but I didn't say a word, seeing as he offered this apartment to me for a very low price. To be honest, the low price was another thing that was odd to me, as the apartment was a bit on the fancier side and it clearly cost more than that. So I was really shocked when he immediately agreed to let me live there for the low rent fee that I could offer. And I could recall that during our first meeting, it really seemed like he just wanted someone to live there. But I wasn't complaining because I saw it as a huge win for me, and after settling in, I slept happily that night in my new apartment. So it had been a couple of weeks since I moved into the new apartment, and while I still loved the place, I noticed a couple of strange things that were going on. For starters, I noticed that the other tenant who lived in the building actively avoided my apartment like a plague. I remember spending days wondering why they did that. At first, I thought they were just jealous of my place, but as time went by, I realized that it wasn't jealousy. These people were truly terrified of my apartment, and the look of fear on their faces every time they crossed the hall said it all. Due to this strange behavior, the only people who visited my apartment were my friends from college. On one particular day when I was coming back home, I overheard some of the tenants talking about my place, and through the course of the conversation, I heard them call it the cursed apartment. Now, I wasn't one to believe petty gossip, but I would be lying if I said the strange rumors didn't worry me. That night, I went to bed trying to get some sleep, but I kept thinking about what I heard earlier. So in order to get more comfortable, I turned in my bed to assume a better sleeping position. But as I was turning, out of the corner of my eye, I could see the silhouette of a huge man looming over me. The terrifying sight made my heart skip as I tried my best to muffle a scream. From the slight glimpse, I could tell the man was a lot bigger than me, so a direct confrontation would surely end badly for me. But I also knew that lying still and pretending to sleep wasn't a smart idea, as the intruder was bound to attack sooner or later. So I planned out the last best option in my head, and I put it into action. With no hesitation, I threw my blanket towards the intruder. Stunned that I was awake, he made an attempt to grab me, but the blanket I threw at him bought me some time, and within seconds, I ran at full speed towards my bathroom. Once I was safely inside, I locked the door and called the cops, screaming. While the cops were on their way, I listened at the door to see if the intruder was making his move, but all I heard was silence. I assumed it was a play made by the intruder to make me lower my guard, so I stayed in the bathroom till the cops arrived. When the cops arrived, they searched the apartment before letting me out of the bathroom. I was then asked a couple of questions, and I told them everything they needed to know. But after looking around and carrying out a small investigation, the cops began to doubt my claim as the head officer asked me, "Are you sure you saw someone in here? Because from the look of things, it really seems like no one apart from you was here." Confused, I said, "But I'm sure I saw someone watching me while I was sleeping. He also attempted to attack me." The officer then looked at me and said, "Well, we checked the door and there was no signs of breaking and entering." Baffled at his statement, I didn't know what else to say. As if there weren't any signs of breaking in, I didn't have any proof apart from my word. The officer saw I was having a hard time making sense of things, so he said, "Look, kid, I know you are confused right now, but I heard it's finals week, so maybe the pressures of the exam is getting to you and making you see things. Trust me, college finals can do that to a man." The other officers laughed at his joke, but I didn't. I was still in shock, and I wasn't in the mood to laugh. The cops left after a while, and they told me to be sure that there was someone before I called the next time. The week that followed after that incident was horrible, as I couldn't sleep well and I was jumping at the sound of every little thing. Soon the rumors of the apartment being cursed started to seem true to me, and I eventually couldn't take it anymore. So the next day, I went across the hall and begged my neighbor, older Lady Grace, to tell me why my apartment was the subject of many rumors and if those rumors were true. When we had settled in her apartment, she told me a morbid tale about how, for the past 12 years, all 8 tenants who have lived in my apartment had mysteriously disappeared. She said that back-to-back disappearances had caused quite a stir in the neighborhood, and people started getting anxious. But even with all the tension, it was only the people who lived in my apartment who went missing. She then said the cops had opened up numerous missing persons cases due to the rising number of grieving families, but the bodies of all 8 tenants were never found. She then added that Mr. Terrence, my landlord, was always questioned after every one of his tenants had gone missing, but he always proved he had nothing to do with it, and he always walked free. As she spoke about Mr. Terrence, I noticed she had a bit of anger in her voice, so I asked, "Hey, I know this is a bit forward, Miss Grace, but do you have anything against my landlord, Terrence?" The old woman then looked at me and said, "No, I have no problems with him, but there's something about that man. You're young, so you won't understand, but I can see things, and something isn't right with him." Her words struck me as I left her apartment. I told myself that I really didn't find anything wrong with my landlord, Terrence. Apart from the incessant use of air fresheners, he seemed like a nice man, but even then, I wasn't going to take any chances. That night, I stayed up doing research on the cases, and I found out everything that old Lady Grace said was true. So I made up my mind to move. I started making preparations to move the next day. I managed to get a place to stay as one of my friends allowed me to stay with him until I found another place. To avoid any problems, I decided not to tell Mr. Terrence that I was moving till the next morning when I was ready to leave. I can't really remember, but I'm guessing it was due to the abrupt moving process, as I forgot to put on or spray the air fresheners that morning. I spent the whole day at my friend's house, setting up my things, and after a long day's work, I went back home knowing it'd be the last night I'd spend in the strange apartment. But when I got home, a truly morbid and rancid smell filled my nostrils. It was so bad that I found it hard to breathe. I rushed to open a window or get a can of air fresheners when the words, "So I heard you're moving," made me freeze. I slowly turned around to see who said the sentence, and standing there in the dark was my landlord, Mr. Terrence. Fear filled me as I started to stutter the words. What are you doing here, Mr. Terrence?" Totally ignoring my question, he said, "Why didn't you tell me you were moving? Were you just going to leave?" I then slowly answered him with, "I was going to tell you in the morning, Mr. Terrence." My landlord then looked at me and said, "Why are you leaving? Because of some false rumors that you heard? You'd be a fool to give up this apartment after I basically let you live here for a non-existent price." It was dark, and I couldn't see Mr. Terrence's face, but I could hear the rising anger in his voice, so I said, "You're scaring me now, Mr. Terrence, and I think you need to leave." He ignored my statement again before proceeding to say something that I wasn't expecting. As Terrence looked at me, dead in the eyes, he said in a calm voice, "Do you collect anything, Nathan?" Stunned at the totally irrelevant question, I didn't know what to say. But before I could answer the question, he said, "Well, I do. You see, Nathan, I collect these things called human beings. To be honest, I currently have 8 in my collection, and I'm looking to increase that number to 9 by the end of this night." It took me a while for my mind to register the horrifying statement that my landlord had just made. But before I could react, he lunged at me with his fist in the air. Within seconds, he was in front of me, but I managed to dodge the dangerous punch. His hand went through the drywall, and the wall pieces went flying through the air. Frustrated, he pulled his hand out of the wall, and for a split second, everything clicked as I had a horrible realization about Mr. Terrence's collectibles. It was dark, but there was no mistaking it. Staring right at me was a rotting corpse situated in the wall of my apartment. My mind started unraveling at the ghastly sight, but I didn't stop because I knew if I didn't do something quickly, I would soon join his collection inside the walls. Mr. Terrence was free now, and as he saw my pale face, he said, "I see you've seen where I keep my wonderful collectibles. Don't worry, you'll soon make a fine addition." I rushed for the door, but I wasn't quick enough as he managed to tackle me into a table. The contents of the table spilled over as we fell to the floor struggling. I fought back with all of my strength, but it was hopeless as he was 2 times bigger than me. And it didn't take long before he had his arms wrapped around my neck. I don't know if you've ever been strangled before, but there aren't enough words to describe how painful it is. I couldn't breathe as I felt him put his whole weight down on my neck. I gasped for air as the world around me began to dim. I thrashed and struggled to look for something, anything that I could use to defend myself, and I was about to give up before I felt it. One of my hands thrashing had managed to get a hold of an air freshener can. It must have been one of the cans that fell when we collided into the table. I knew the can wasn't strong enough to knock him out, so I decided to temporarily blind him. With no hesitation, I picked up the can and sprayed it in his eyes. He screamed and reached for his eyes as he finally let go of my neck. I then struck his head with the can before rushing to the door, and as I opened it, I ran into the arms of numerous cops that had just arrived. I would later find out Old Lady Grace had heard the noises from my apartment, so she called the cops. I don't know if it was from the fighting or the fear, but I passed out there, happy that I had survived the cursed apartment. After that incident, numerous things surrounding the apartment were revealed. Mr. Terrence was arrested, and after his apartment was searched and tore down, over 8 badly preserved corpses were found in the walls, and each and every one of them was identified as the bodies of his former tenants. After interrogations, Mr. Terrence also confessed to watching his tenants, potential victims, when they slept. He also went into details about how he got the preserved bodies into the walls, as he said he managed to do it all under the ruse of remodeling the apartment. He then finally confessed to keeping a spare key to the apartment, a key that was unknown to his residents. The families of the victims called for him to be put to death, but he was instead sentenced to life imprisonment. After the whole case had been settled, I moved back to the suburbs with my family. I didn't finish college as I was told I needed time to heal from the traumatizing event. Even after all this time, the therapy still doesn't work, as there's nothing anyone can tell me to make me get over the fact that I slept in a room filled with 8 corpses for over 4 months. But on the bright side, I left the morbid experience with a lesson, as I realized that it's not only people that have stories. Places too always have a tale to tell, and those tales should be important to anyone who is deciding to live or stay in those places, because the knowledge of those tales may one day save or end your life.
The apartment next door is empty again. When we first moved in, our neighbours were a middle-aged doctor and his girlfriend. Carrying all our furniture upstairs proved to be quite the challenge, so we were happily surprised when he offered to help. Although we didn't talk much that day, beyond pleasantries, he seemed like a nice guy. I saw him around a few times after that, bumping into him while checking the mailbox or going down the stairs. He'd smile and nod, and I'd smile back. As far as the neighbours go, he was one of the good ones. I'm not the most social person, however, so it took me some time to realise that I hadn't seen him in a while. I asked my boyfriend and got the same answer from him. If our neighbour had been outside recently, our paths hadn't crossed. Neither of us worried about it. We could hear him moving around after all, and it wasn't like we were close. Over the next few weeks, little grievances started to pile up in regards to our neighbour. He'd step out in the middle of the night, activating the automatic lights that filtered in through the bedroom window. Sometimes he'd bang on the shared wall in the middle of the day. Always twice in rapid succession, but never at a set time. I was tempted to bang back, but figured it wasn't worth a potential argument. The strangest thing I remember is seeing his shadow through our front door on a particular night in September. It wasn't unusual, seeing as he had to pass our door to reach his own, but when I went to the toilet half an hour later, I noticed the shadow was still there. That was the first time an uneasy feeling came over me. As suddenly as the disturbances had started, they disappeared again. Everything was quiet for 2 weeks, and my boyfriend and I were grateful for this newfound peace. The for rent sign appeared at the start of the third week. Neither of us took much notice of it, aside for a passing comment. We expected to hear the doctor and his girlfriend move out at one point, but we never heard or saw them again. The next set of neighbours got on our nerves from day one. They had a young child with them, and appeared to believe that proper parenting included regular screaming matches. We learned to tune them out over time, and by the time December rolled around, their voices had become little more than background noise. I saw them for the first time while returning from a shopping trip on a chilly December afternoon. A tight-lipped smile was the only greeting I could muster up for them, but they didn't appear to notice. They kept looking straight ahead and passed me without a word. I remember the shiver that ran down my neck to my spine when they were right next to me. Although the uncomfortable feeling remained as my eyes followed the couple, I couldn't bring myself to look away. I watched them reach the door and stand motionless for a good 3 minutes before the husband fished his keys out of his pocket and opened the door. When the time came for me to walk to my own front door, I made sure I had my keys ready. As far as unlocking the door and throwing yourself inside goes, I'm sure I broke the record that day. The banging started not long after, always twice, never at the same time. I brought it up to my boyfriend, who brushed it off as one of the disadvantages of apartment living. I didn't tell him about the hint of fear that was growing in the pit of my stomach, afraid he'd laugh at my paranoia. You see, I'm the type of person that likes to watch a horror movie, but can't walk down the hallway alone after doing so. Not the bravest of the bunch by any means. Working from home meant that I had plenty of time to sit and worry about every single noise I heard, or more specifically, didn't hear. The screaming had stopped by then, and however unusual it may be, I kind of missed it. There was only silence and the periodic banging against the wall. I took to working with music in the background. The lights outside came on at 4:37 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember because I had to use the toilet and would have stayed in bed if it had been closer to the time I'd normally wake up. Ready to go right back to sleep after relieving myself, I didn't bother turning on the lights in the hallway. I rounded the corner and found myself looking right at the shadow of what could have only been a child, swaying gently back and forth. The toilet, which is only a few steps from our front door, suddenly seemed to be miles away. As badly as I had to go, my feet were glued to the floor. The thought of taking even a single step closer to that shadow made me feel sick to my stomach. I slowly backed away and returned to the bedroom. Despite my reservations, I ended up shaking my boyfriend awake. "I think the neighbour's kids are standing outside," I told him. "It's freezing. Should we call the police?" My boyfriend, disoriented and still half asleep, stumbled towards the front door. I followed a few steps behind, ready to make a run for it. "Are you sure you didn't imagine it?" he asked me. The light was still on, but the shadow was no longer there. I shook my head. If there was one thing I was certain of, it was that someone had been standing there only minutes ago. "All right, I'll take a look outside." He moved to get the keys and I felt nausea return tenfold. "No," I said quickly, grabbing hold of his arm. "You're probably right. I must have been imagining it. Let's just go back to bed." The rational part of my brain told me I was a horrible person leaving a child outside in the cold at this hour, but I kept my mouth shut. I felt in my gut that opening the door wasn't safe. I didn't end up going to the toilet after all that night. The fourth couple moved in a month and a half ago. I'm used to it now, the banging, the shadows, the ever-present chill that doesn't seem to go away, the return of the for rent sign and the new tenants. Rinse and repeat. I tried a couple more times to talk about it with my boyfriend, but he doesn't seem to pick up on any of these occurrences. We're looking at houses now, and I can only pray we'll find one soon. I'll buy anything if it means I get to move out of this apartment. I no longer acknowledge new tenants because I fear they might end up inviting me inside. I guess I'll never know for sure, but I don't think the people who enter the apartment ever truly leave.
Narrated by Dorsey Jackson of Dorsey Jackson Global at Compound City. Be sure to like and subscribe.